Right, so today I want to talk about this story, and it's titled Japan to Build Up to 22 New Coal Power Plants Despite Climate Emergency. So, anyway, the whole point being here is that in the West, we're constantly bombarded with, oh, climate change, and we got to shut down our oil and gas industry, and shut down coal power plants, and shut down natural gas pipelines, and oil pipelines, and every pipeline, no matter what's in it. And yet, all of the environmentalists, I would say probably 99% of them, there is some that are probably against it, uh, could not care less about the countries that are actually polluting the climate. And it just goes to show that, I mean, I've made several videos about this. I just like to make videos reminding people because there's always new viewers and there's always people questioning stuff that I say, even though it's largely, most of it is right on point. But the whole point being is that if they actually cared about the climate, then they would spend zero time uh, worried about what goes on in Canada or the States, even, and all their time worried about what's going on in China, India, Japan, these kind of countries, because we are getting rid of all our coal power plants. We are shutting down our oil sands, or at the very least, we're regulating it out of existence, basically. But yet, we're completely silent about the countries that produce the vast majority of pollution, CO2, whatever you want to call it. Like, I mean, between China and India, that's more than half of the world's emissions just in those two countries. I think it's like two-thirds. Um, so, again, if they actually cared about the climate, they wouldn't spend any time worried about Canada. And this is something that people that disagree with the left on this kind of stuff, they often have a very hard time. Or I wouldn't say often, but a lot of times they don't have a they don't have a lot of tangible stuff. I mean, you sit around debating the data, and that doesn't usually work with the left. The best way of I mean, there's plenty of data you can point to that completely disproves what they're saying, but this is a very good thing to point out in that if they actually believe what they believe, you pick the places that are the most. Like, if you have two injuries, one you have you got your leg cut off, and another one you have a paper cut, you don't go get a band-aid or tell someone, yeah, no, go get me a band-aid. I need to cover up this paper cut. I don't want to bleed out even though you got your leg cut off. Like, that's what the environmentalists are doing, in that they're more worried about the paper cut than they are the leg that's been cut off. And that's why they have zero credibility. So whenever you're in the debates, or whenever even it's even brought up, until they're willing to admit that we shouldn't be worried about what's going on in Canada, at least whatsoever, until we can convince the other countries to change their ways, because the whole lead by example doesn't work. We've been leading by example for decades now, and yet we have China, India, Japan, uh, most of the non-Western countries that are completely ignoring any environmental regulations, any environmental anything. And I mean, the problem with that too is that most of these big climate treaties and stuff, they don't, they do nothing to clamp down on China or India or any of these countries. They do nothing. It's all just for show. And the real thing behind climate change too is another way to get them is it's all about socialism. They don't actually care about the climate. Like I say, if the only way people's beliefs and people's arguments are to be taken seriously is if they're universal and there's no obvious contradictions. When the minute they're not universal and they're not and there's obvious contradictions, then they deserve to be dismissed because they don't make any sense. And like I say, the real reason that they want social or they want climate, they're worried about climate change, is they want socialism. We have the one of the authors of the Green New Deal, who is like the darling of all of pretty much the world when it comes to these green policies, saying, um, yeah, the real goal was about socialism. I mean, the Green New Deal had stuff about reparations, and most of it wasn't even about the climate. So again, they don't care about that. They want socialism. They can't convince members of the general public to get socialism, so they have to lie and manipulate people. And the other big thing being is something that Michael Moore pointed out in his documentary, which is something I was a little bit aware of, but uh, is that there's a lot of people that are taking advantage of all these of the positive, the I would say the unfair positive nature behind green energy and all the government grants and stuff that you can get, and they're people that are enriching themselves unjustly because of these stupid green policies. I mean, you look at a lot of these a lot of these politicians and stuff. Are they pledging to give up their private jets? Are they pledging to give up their second or third houses? No. You know, these people that, and again, this is another thing that I can't stand to, and the fact that environmentalists, I mean the everyday environmentalists, the everyday climate change activists, doesn't care about the celebrities and the politicians that fly to climate summits, you know, all individually on their private jets or their yachts, and they don't care about that, it just goes to show that, like I say, the level of credibility in the whole climate movement, it's non-existent. Like, it's literally non-existent. And I don't know how it has so much credibility. I mean, I do know how, and that the media and the universities and the public schools brainwash people, but I don't. It surprises me that more people haven't figured it out. Like, it really does. And the problem being is that um, I don't think that China and Japan and India and all these countries should have to have massive clampdowns. I don't believe that. I just think that they should have to have at least realistic environmental standards. The problem being is that if the leftists had their way, yeah, they'd shut all of ours, they'd shut everything down here, and just let them do whatever. And that's the problem, is that um, the the lead by example argument is a stupid argument. That's an argument I hear all the time. Oh, we need to lead by example. Again, if we know that the other countries are going to do it, what is the point of lead by example? Because we know China and we know India and these countries aren't going to do it. Like I say, we've been going about this whole environmental movement for decades now, and China just keeps building more power plants. Like, why in the world would they just right out of the blue? Yeah, let's change our mind. Like, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Like, you guys are idiots if you believe that. And the reason why it's such a big issue is that coal power is coal power and all this kind of stuff. It's very cheap energy, especially compared to the renewables. So if you actually, I mean, you have people constantly complaining nowadays about the cost of living and poverty and all this kind of stuff. Well, one of the things that goes into that is the fact that energy is so expensive nowadays, and that because of the carbon tax and stuff, especially. So you have all these people that, oh, we claim to care about the poor and the middle class and all this kind of stuff, but yet they constantly support policies that just hurt the poor and the middle class and everyone. And that's something that I really cannot stand. And it's just another thing that goes to show that people that argue for that kind of stuff, they do have no credibility, like none whatsoever. Like, if you claim to care about the poor and the middle class and the working class, and you turn around and support policies that hurt them, like, you've gone wrong, and you've gone wrong drastically. Like, I don't care what your policy position is. The carbon tax hurts the poor and the middle class. And it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything either. We know it doesn't do anything. The government's own numbers show that. So we have a party that likes to, oh, we're going to lecture people on science, but yet they turn around and support policies that there's no science to back it up. There is no evidence that backs up a carbon tax, none whatsoever, that it works. And there's plenty of evidence. I mean, it's just basic logic and reasoning. A carbon tax is basically a tax on pretty much everything, uh, which means that the cost of pretty much everything is going to go up, and real median wages have not gone up in what, since like the 80s or the 90s, and yet the cost of living continues to go up, the cost of goods and services continues to go up, and yet the problem being is that the left refuses to acknowledge the reasons for that, because the reasons for that is because their policies don't work, because of the carbon tax. You know, the cost of goods and services has gone way up because of increased regulation, increased taxation. The cost of goods and services have gone way up. The cost of living has gone up largely because the government has gotten way too involved in than in living. The immigration is way too high. The problem is that, I mean, it's just simple supply and demand, right? That when Demand goes way up, well, the cost is going to go way up because there's more people that want it. And then when the government's bringing in over a million immigrants every 3 years, it's even, I think the numbers continue to go up. Well, guess what? The cost of living is going to go way up. And the problem is that they largely want to live in in cities, which is why again the cost of living has gone up, especially in the big cities disproportionately more than in small towns. And most people kind of need to live in or near a city. That's the problem, is that there's only so many jobs to go around in small towns, but there's a near infinite amount of jobs, assuming the government isn't too involved, which usually doesn't happen, but whatever, uh, in cities. So that's the problem when it comes to that kind of stuff. And everybody wants the cost of living to go down. Everybody wants the cost of goods and services to go down. The problem is that we have largely one side that refuses to acknowledge why it's happening and refuses to acknowledge that because of their policies is why it's happening. So anyway, I'm going to leave the video there. If you liked it, make sure to like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got a link in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already, and check me out on BitChute if you haven't already. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there.